The controversy surrounding Jada Pinkett Smith seems to sink deeper with every passing week. Just when it appeared the storm might calm, a new wave of allegations has surfaced, more unsettling than anything before. Not long after a man stepped forward claiming Jada threatened his life for exposing private details about her marriage, even more disturbing claims began to circulate behind the scenes. According to these new accounts, Jada's long-discussed fixation on Tupac Shakur may have crossed into deeply troubling territory. Insiders allege that her fascination wasn't just emotional or symbolic, but ventured into the realm of spiritual experimentation, so much so that her daughter, Willow, was allegedly pulled into ritual-like practices tied to Tupac and the idea of rebirth. If these claims hold any truth, they paint a picture that's hard to stomach. To be clear, there's no footage or direct proof showing Jada performing anything resembling a spell. Still, over the years, certain statements she's made and choices she's publicly embraced have raised eyebrows. In Hollywood, where unconventional belief systems often flourish unchecked, whispers like these don't come entirely out of nowhere. It also doesn't help that Jada once had close ties to Scientology, and that she and Will reportedly enrolled their children in a school heavily staffed by Scientologist instructors. When it comes to Tupac, Jada's emotional attachment has never been a secret. She's spoken openly about him, describing him as her true soulmate and the deepest love she ever knew. That part is well established. Where the narrative takes a far more uncomfortable turn is in how that obsession may have extended into her family life. Many still remember the letter that surfaced years ago, written by a young Willow, pleading for Tupac to return. At the time, some dismissed it as a poetic, emotional expression encouraged by a grieving mother. But insiders now suggest it may have been something far more literal. Allegedly, Jada truly believed she could tap into spiritual forces to somehow bring Tupac back, through reincarnation or other supernatural means. It's a chilling claim, and one that adds a darker layer to an already complex story. And as if that weren't enough, the situation has escalated legally. Jada is now facing a lawsuit filed by Will Smith's former assistant, Bilal Salam. According to Bilal, tensions exploded during Will's birthday celebration in 2021, where he claims Jada issued a frightening warning, suggesting he could disappear or be harmed if he continued speaking about her private affairs. Bilal further alleges that she attempted to silence him by pushing for a non-disclosure agreement, allegedly to ensure he stayed quiet. Whether these claims stand up in court remains to be seen, but one thing is certain: the narrative surrounding Jada Pinkett Smith is no longer just about unconventional beliefs or complicated relationships, it's entering far more serious, and unsettling, territory. Instead of retreating into silence, Bilal Salam allegedly did the exact opposite. He kept talking. And with every new detail he shared, the accusations surrounding Jada reportedly grew more unsettling. According to his latest claims, Jada is now being linked to bizarre gatherings hosted inside her home, events described as anything but harmless. These weren't wild celebrity parties in the usual sense. Bilal Salam alleges they crossed into disturbing territory, blending explicit behavior with what some have described as ritualistic or voodoo-like practices. Bilal Salam further claims these alleged gatherings weren't limited to just Will and Jada. He insists other well-known figures were present as well, adding another layer of seriousness to the situation. But what truly raised alarm bells, according to him, is the reason he believes Jada tried to intimidate him in the first place. He suggests she feared he may have come across compromising footage from one of these events, evidence that could have exposed far more than anyone expected. And somehow, Tupac's name is pulled into the narrative yet again. Bilal Salam alleges that during these gatherings, Jada would dress in masculine clothing and attempt to channel Tupac while engaging in behavior he describes as deeply disturbing. Whether true or not, the allegation alone has shocked many, but the most troubling claims don't stop there. Sources close to Jada and Will's daughter, Willow, have reportedly begun speaking out, claiming that Willow was emotionally affected, if not deeply traumatized, by her mother's fixation on Tupac. According to these accounts, Jada allegedly wanted Willow to be directly involved in ritual-like practices, believing she could somehow bring Tupac back in another form. This brings renewed attention to a moment that once passed with little scrutiny: the letter. When Willow was just 11 or 12 years old, she was encouraged to write a message to Tupac, asking him to return and make her mother happy. In the letter, Willow wrote that she believed Tupac was still alive somewhere and begged him to come back so her family could finally be happy again. On the surface, some once viewed the letter as emotional or poetic. But when you truly pause and consider it, the weight of it becomes overwhelming. This wasn't a fictional exercise or a symbolic ritual, it was a real child writing to a man who had been dead for years. A man she never knew personally. A man who was not her parent. And yet, here she was, pleading with him to return so her mother could find peace. That's where the discomfort sets in. Children don't naturally carry thoughts like this. They don't independently arrive at the belief that their parents' happiness depends on the resurrection of someone long gone. That kind of emotional reasoning doesn't come from nowhere, it's absorbed. It grows in environments where adult grief spills into a child's emotional space, where unresolved pain quietly becomes a shared burden. Think about the psychological weight of that. Imagine being a child and believing it's somehow your responsibility to heal your parents' heartbreak. Imagine internalizing the idea that love means fixing wounds that were never yours to carry. That kind of pressure doesn't fade with age, it follows you, shaping how you understand relationships, obligation, and self-worth. It teaches you that other people's pain is yours to manage, even if it costs you your own emotional safety. What makes this even more unsettling is how little concern it sparked at the time. Many people called the moment touching. Some even praised it as beautiful. Very few stopped to ask the harder questions. Why does a child feel this way? Why is she thinking about resurrection, absence, and emotional replacement? Why wasn't this grief processed privately by the adult who experienced it, instead of being passed down? And this is where the story begins to darken, not because of anything mystical, but because of the emotional dynamics beneath the surface. As more details emerged over the years, people began revisiting moments like this with clearer eyes. What once felt poetic began to feel unsettling. The narrative quietly shifted from how heartfelt to how harmful. Now, some believe that letter wasn't simply about grief, it was evidence of something deeper. An obsession that never fully healed, never fully released its grip, and instead lingered within the emotional fabric of a family. And when people talk about obsession here, they don't mean love or loss alone. They mean an inability to let go, a refusal to accept reality, and a desire to resurrect the past, no matter the cost. This is where the conversation takes a sharper, more unsettling turn. Over time, speculation about Jada's attachment to Tupac began drifting into increasingly extreme territory, talk of spirituality, reincarnation, even ritualistic belief systems. Whether any of that holds truth almost becomes secondary. What truly matters is that the fixation was visible enough, intense enough, that people felt justified even entertaining those ideas. When fans start wondering aloud whether someone is trying to bring a person back through another human being, it signals that something crossed an emotional boundary long ago. The situation involving August Alsina only intensified that perception. When Jada publicly likened August to Tupac, when she suggested that meeting him helped heal wounds connected to Pac, many people paused. Not because healing is wrong, but because of how that healing was framed. It didn't sound like closure. It sounded like replacement. Less like moving forward, and more like rebuilding the past using a new person as emotional scaffolding. For some observers, that was the moment everything clicked. The idea that August may have functioned, consciously or not, as a stand-in, a proxy, or an emotional echo of Tupac began circulating heavily online. Yes, it's speculation. But it's speculation fueled by patterns, by repeated statements, by the consistent habit of filtering present relationships through the lens of one long gone. When the past keeps showing up in the present, people start to question whether it was ever truly left behind. And when children exist within an emotional climate like that, even on the periphery, the impact can be deep. Children don't need explicit explanations to understand emotional hierarchies. They feel them. They absorb them. Tone, repetition, reverence, the way energy shifts when a name is mentioned, these things speak louder than words. A child doesn't need to be told who mattered most. They already know. Some fans now look at Willow's later self-expression, lifestyle, and unconventional choices through that lens. Not as criticism, but as context. Growing up surrounded by unresolved grief, blurred emotional boundaries, and intense adult narratives can distort a child's sense of grounding. It can make stability feel elusive and identity feel fluid, pushing a young person to search for meaning and control in ways that seem unconventional from the outside. What troubles many observers most is the lingering sense that the children were never fully shielded. That adult wounds, personal exploration, and unresolved trauma took center stage, while the emotional burden quietly shifted onto younger shoulders. Protecting children isn't only about keeping them physically safe, it's about emotional containment. It's about ensuring that adult pain doesn't become a child's responsibility to manage. So when people describe the situation as dark, they're not necessarily pointing to rituals or superstition. They're talking about emotional darkness. About blurred roles. About a child positioned as an emotional caretaker. About grief being romanticized rather than resolved. About obsession being normalized instead of addressed. What makes it even more unsettling is how easily all of this was wrapped in language like openness, spiritual growth, or non-traditional parenting. Transparency has limits, especially when children are involved. There's a difference between emotional honesty and emotional oversharing. Crossing that line doesn't create enlightenment, it creates instability. Children need clarity, not emotional complexity. They need reassurance, not existential confusion. That's why, in hindsight, the letter no longer reads as innocent. It reads like a warning sign. A snapshot of a child attempting to repair something she never damaged. A child reaching across the boundary between life and death because she believed that was the only way her family could feel whole. And beliefs like that don't form in a vacuum. Regardless of whether the more extreme theories are accurate, many people agree on one thing: that letter revealed far too much. It exposed an emotional environment where grief spoke too loudly, where the past overshadowed the present, and where a child learned, far too early, that her mother's happiness felt fragile, conditional, and dependent on something she could never control. That reality unsettles people more than any rumor ever could. And there's another moment that often resurfaces in this broader conversation. In 2014, when Willow was just 13, she appeared in a photo shoot alongside then 20-year-old former Disney star Moises Arias. One image in particular drew immediate backlash: Willow lying on a bed facing the camera, while Moises, shirtless, sat nearby leaning against the wall. He initially shared the photo on social media but deleted it shortly after public reaction labeled the image uncomfortable and inappropriate. According to reports at the time, the situation escalated beyond online criticism. Child Protective Services in Los Angeles reportedly became involved, transforming what some dismissed as celebrity controversy into something far more serious. Sources indicated that social workers wanted to speak directly with Moises about the photo, not because of any alleged criminal behavior, but because the optics alone raised concern. Willow herself was interviewed twice, and those conversations included her parents, Will and Jada. In that moment, fame didn't shield the family, it magnified everything. What might have remained private for others became a national discussion overnight. And for many people looking back now, it wasn't an isolated incident, but another data point in a larger pattern, one that continues to raise difficult questions about boundaries, protection, and the emotional environments children are asked to grow up in. What pushed this situation from controversial to deeply divisive was how Jada chose to respond. Instead of acknowledging why so many people felt uneasy, she doubled down, hard. There was no retreat, no reconsideration, no attempt to meet public concern halfway. In her view, the photo shoot was entirely harmless, and she made that stance unmistakably clear in a heated exchange with TMZ. Her response was blunt and combative, dismissing the backlash outright and accusing critics of projecting their own dysfunction onto an innocent image. The message was clear: if you saw a problem, the problem was you. But that response didn't calm the conversation, it intensified it. Rather than closing the issue, it widened the gap between Jada and the public. Many people felt her explanation missed the point entirely. The concern, they argued, was never about sexual intent. It was about context. About boundaries. About power dynamics. And most importantly, about the responsibility adults have when children are involved. To them, labeling critics as trash didn't address those concerns, it sidestepped them. No amount of reframing, philosophical or otherwise, erased the discomfort of seeing a young teenager placed in an intimate setting with an adult man. Jada's refusal to soften her position only reinforced the perception that she was disconnected from how her actions were being received. And this is where the narrative begins to compound. That photo didn't remain a standalone controversy, it became one piece of a much larger story the internet has been piecing together ever since. When people stack that moment alongside the growing list of allegations and rumors, claims of secretive gatherings, whispers of ritualistic behavior, and a long-running fixation on Tupac that many find unsettling, the tone shifts dramatically. Incidents that once felt eccentric or avant-garde now get reinterpreted as something darker. What was once brushed off as unconventional starts to look, to some, deliberate or even manipulative. Take the alleged private gatherings, for example. Online, they're often described as exclusive, secretive events that blur the line between spiritual exploration and something far more insular and cult-like. Whether those accounts are exaggerated or not almost becomes irrelevant once a narrative takes hold. The internet thrives on pattern recognition, and once it senses one, it rarely lets go. Add rumors involving voodoo or ritual practices, ideas already loaded with fear and misunderstanding, and the public imagination fills in the blanks at lightning speed. These claims stop being isolated gossip and start functioning as symbols, reinforcing a growing mistrust of Jada's judgment, her parenting, and her influence. Then there's the Tupac element, which for many critics has moved beyond grief into fixation. Jada has spoken openly about her emotional bond with him, and while loss and longing are deeply human, people argue that the way she's publicly framed that connection has often crossed uncomfortable lines, especially within the context of her marriage and family. The recurring idea that she's tried to bring Tupac back, whether emotionally, symbolically, or spiritually, has become central to how detractors interpret her behavior. To them, it suggests an inability to release the past, a habit of blurred emotional boundaries, and a tendency to project unresolved issues onto those closest to her, including her children. So when the Willow photo resurfaces now, it's no longer viewed as a single lapse in judgment. It's seen as an early indicator. Something that was once defended as misunderstood art or progressive parenting now feels, to many, like part of a broader pattern of questionable choices. And the internet, relentless and archival by nature, has done what it always does. Old interviews are replayed. Screenshots resurface. Past statements are dissected with new context. Words that once sounded bold or empowering are reinterpreted as dismissive, evasive, or even harmful. In that light, the controversy isn't just about one photo or one response, it's about how repeated moments, stacked together over time, reshape public perception. And once that perception hardens, every past decision gets reevaluated through a far less forgiving lens. What's impossible to ignore is how dramatically the public mood has shifted over the years. There was a time when Jada was applauded for her transparency, praised for speaking boldly, challenging tradition, and rejecting rigid ideas about womanhood, marriage, and parenting. That fearlessness once read as empowering. Now, many critics see it differently. What used to be framed as bravery is increasingly described as carelessness. People are asking hard questions about whether her dedication to radical honesty came with unintended consequences, especially for her children. They're wondering if boundary pushing remains admirable when the people most affected are minors who can't fully grasp the long-term impact of visibility, scrutiny, and adult-driven environments. In the middle of it all, Willow often becomes less of a person and more of a symbol. Conversations about her frequently shift away from who she is and toward what she represents in debates about parenting, autonomy, and protection. Supporters argue that she was raised in a space that valued self-expression and independence, and that over-sheltering children can be just as damaging as overexposure. Critics push back, saying real autonomy requires informed consent, and that's something a young teenager simply can't offer when adult dynamics and public consumption are involved. At this point, the argument isn't really about a single image or moment anymore. It's about where society draws its lines, and who gets the authority to draw them. Now, years later, when all these moments are laid out one after another, the scrutiny has intensified. It's no longer casual curiosity, it's full examination. Old interviews, resurfaced clips, and throwaway remarks are treated like evidence, reinforcing the perception that Jada operates by a moral code that feels unsettling to many observers. Whether that perception is fair, exaggerated, or deeply flawed almost becomes irrelevant once it takes hold.